We're... Welcome everybody to the first virtual Lunch and Learn of 2025. My name is Brandy Smith and I am the Communications Director at Utah Clean Energy. We're so thrilled you could join us today. I am joined by our Director of Government Relations, Josh Kraft, who is going to give you a preview of everything that is on deck for Utah's 2025 legislative session. I can see that Josh's legislative beard is coming in nicely, so we know it's going to be a serious session with energy at the forefront. He's only just a little bit sleep deprived at this point, so you've caught us at a good time. I'll just ask everybody we know there's going to be tons of questions and lots of interest, which is great. Please put your questions in the chat throughout today's webinar. And at the end, we have booked plenty of time to go over all of the questions and discussions that you might have. And at the end of the presentation, I'll be kind of going through those questions and we'll hope to get to everybody. So with that, I am going to pass things on over to Utah Clean Energy's Director of Government Relations, Josh Kraft.
Thanks, Brandy, and thank you all for coming. We have a pretty intense and crazy 45 days in front of us. The legislative session began on Tuesday, and it will run through March 7th. Before I go into some of all of the bills and our priorities for this year, I want to just remind everyone that of our priorities here at Utah, our overall work at Utah Clean Energy, we are focused on climate solutions and clean energy. And for us, that means the work that we do to make our buildings more efficient and zero emissions, to make our transportation system emissions free, to reduce power and improve the efficiency of our electricity system, and finally to have nonpartisan conversations with leaders about climate solutions. That's sort of the core of our work, and that's the lens I want everyone to think about as we're going into our bills. So before, I wanted to start off by saying that we are going to look through the overall picture of energy in this legislative session, the way that we're tracking it, talk about our priorities. I want to talk then about some specific bills, and they're going to be quick, but we'll talk about our priorities, some we're opposed to, and some we have some big questions about. And then we're going to end by talking about some take action that we'd like you to do after this meeting today. So that's overall where we're going to be. This session feels different for those of us who've been working in energy, and energy has become a central focus of Utah policymakers. And you're going to see a lot more, and you're already seeing a lot more energy and energy-related bills than I think we've seen, at least in some time. And it's getting the attention of legislators and leaders in a way that I haven't seen in quite some time, which is both an opportunity and it's also a challenge. But I wanted to give a little context as to why. And for some of you who've worked with us before, you have heard some of this, but I think it's worth going over. The first thing is we are seeing a large increase in electricity demand and planned increases in electricity demand at utilities across the country, and this is driven by electrification of heating and cooling systems and vehicles in part, which can very much be a good thing for climate and air quality. But also we're seeing a rush for electricity from very new sources of demand, like data centers and potentially large manufacturing centers, and who are very electricity intensive. And so we're seeing, again, projections of increases nationally in electricity demand in ways that we haven't seen in a long time. While this is happening, we're also seeing Rocky Mountain Power, our major investor-owned electric utility, and PacifiCorp not planning to invest in new clean energy resources. In fact, if we're looking at their latest 2025 integrated resource plan, there's definitely a reduction in planned investments in new resources across the board. And that's, I think, largely driven by some financial challenges that the company feels that it's facing in the wake of wildfires and wildfire liability. And that's something to keep in mind as we go into this session. And finally, not last but not least, is the governor and policymakers' response to this. The governor has issued Operation Gigawatt, or a plan, which is a plan and a concept that Utah should have a goal of doubling Utah's energy production by 2030. That's a pretty heady target. Also, Senate President Stuart Adams talked about tripling Utah's energy production by 2050, and particularly in respect to nuclear and geothermal. And so this is a big change from what we've seen in the past, and I think is going to be important to how we view all the bills we're looking at this session. So, what are our priorities? And this is going to be applicable to basically all of the bills that we are, and all the legislation that we review. We are opportunistic. We want to have an impact on states' planning, and so this is how we're viewing things overall. First, I wanted to note that we're looking to improve Utah's planning and the energy and policy in the energy field by broadening the perspective of who's at the table and making sure there's a broad round group of stakeholder regulators feeding information, providing information about policy recommendations about what's impacting our energy system to our leaders, the governor's office, to the legislature, in a way that I think didn't happen last year in particular. And we want to make sure, as Utah Clean Energy, that there's a voice for climate and air quality representatives as part of that. We can't be building an energy system without taking into account the fact that we have a changing climate and that we have major opportunities to incentivize and promote clean energy resources. I think we saw a fair number of rushed bills last legislative session that we're still sorting through, and we want to make sure that that doesn't happen in the future, and that again, that climate, clean energy have a voice at the table. We want to make sure that there's a level playing field for clean energy as we're seeking to meet new demands and address our environmental concerns. We can't be putting in new barriers to allow solar, geothermal, energy storage, and wind to participate in our electricity system. These are low-cost, homegrown, zero fuel cost resources, and we want to make sure there are not new barriers that are put in place. And I'm going to talk about that in a bit. We have to update and build our transmission system. This is something that we've seen a large level of bipartisan support for and interest in. If we're going to be adding new resources to meet new demands, if we're going to be making our system more resilient and responsive and efficient, we're going to have to be making our existing grid more modern and then eventually expanding the amount of transmission. We're pleased that's part of the governor's plans. Legislators like Senator Scott Sandell have talked about this. And so this is an area, if we think of good cooperation, but it's really important. And then finally, we need to be continuing to find ways to promote clean vehicles, particularly zero emissions electric vehicles. As we've seen some announcements this week as President Trump has come into office that he wants to scale back on support for electric vehicles. EVs are really important for air quality here. They're also a competitiveness issue, so we need to find ways to be stepping up at the state level if that's going to be the case. So with that, I'm going to turn to some bills we're working on. And if you have, and just a reminder that you'll probably have some questions. And so I'll try to answer those as we go in the chat. All right. I'm going to start with maybe the wonkiest one first, or the second wonkiest one. We'll see. This is a HB 212, Grid Enhancing Technologies by Representative Christine Watkins. This bill is about modernizing our transmission system and updating our electricity grid. We support this bill. This is, in fact, a priority for us this session. The bill seeks to promote the use of advanced transmission technologies. That's pretty wonky and really important. But we know that we need to expand and build out our transmission system to integrate new resources, to make sure that we have efficient, effective regional markets. But we also know that we can do some really important things in the near term, this decade, to make better use, to wring more out of our existing grid. That's going to help with some of the fact that transmission costs are likely to continue to go up as there's congestion. There is demand to interconnect new resources, particularly clean resources. And so there's a category of technologies called grid enhancing technologies that are a mixture of hardware and software that can make better use of our existing transmission system this decade. We've seen some good, I've seen some good studies that suggest that with items with technologies and practices like dynamic line rating, topology optimization, and advanced power flow control, that we can wring a lot more. We can maybe double the use of renewables that can be integrated onto our existing system in key markets this decade. It's also likely to make our grid more responsive in the face of things like wildfires, so we can reroute power more in real time. So this is not in lieu of new transmission capacity that we might need, but a complement to that this decade that we want to make sure that Utah is taking advantage of. So the bill is a pretty simple one, even though it doesn't read that way. Is that we just tasked Rocky Mountain Power, our investor-owned utility, with reviewing advanced transmission technologies, grid enhancing technologies in their key planning and resource decision-making documents before the Utah Public Service Commission. And if those investments are found to be cost-effective, they are allowed to recover costs, and particularly, to help both offset and complement new resource procurement. And so I'll just end there by saying that we know that also that many utilities, including Rocky Mountain Power, are starting to make good use of grid enhancing technologies. This is also an attempt to just put a little more light on that, a little more transparency. So we'll start there. That bill's not yet in committee, but we're tracking it closely, and it's something we support. Second bill, I'm hoping this is a little bit easier for everyone to get their head around. And also a bill that we support. It's HB 119, Solar Panel Restrictions in Homeowners Association Amendments by Representative Doug Owens. I've been in the legislature now for about I think this is my 9th session. One of my first sessions, the Utah legislature came up with a compromise where to both allow for prevent homeowners and condominium associations from putting new restrictions on rooftop solar in detached dwellings, so individual units. And then but it also protected some of the existing governing documents that restricted solar, unless you were able to come up with a 2/3 vote to change those rules. So you had to have a 2/3 of all residents of an HOA or a COA. And I want to tell everyone, I do not live in a homeowners association, so I've not experienced this myself. You may have experienced this, so just keep that in mind. This bill would, in essence, lower the threshold for amending existing government restrictions on solar to a simple majority of residents to 51%. So from a supermajority of 2/3 to 51%. So helping to remove a barrier. There would still be a process. For homeowners association to review those, but the bar for changing existing documents, existing restrictions would be lowered substantially. This bill is still being reviewed in the House Rules Committee. I do not know which committee it will be assigned to. But I want to have everyone, particularly if you are in a homeowners association or you've had challenges with this, keep an eye on this. I think Representative Owens would appreciate your support when it comes to committee, because there's likely to be some opposition, but it's a pretty simple, straightforward measure to make it a little easier for homeowners to add solar. Okay. Now I'm going to move into some bigger bills that we are going to be reviewing and seeking to have some serious input on. This topic relates to those large new loads that I mentioned in the overview. The bill is SB 132, Electric Utility Amendments by Senator Scott Sandell, who is from Tremont. Senator Sandel has emerged as someone who's spent a lot of time on energy resources, and so is putting some more time to learn into these things. This bill is a complicated one, and in essence, what it seeks to do is to offer very large new customers who want very large amounts of power, a process to procure those resources largely at their own cost, outside the traditional process where they would get power probably from in Rocky Mountain Power service territory. And I want to note that this is only for new customers. This is not for any existing customer. So, and it's only for loads above 50 megawatts. So pretty large power plants. You'll see the solar field behind me with my colleagues. That's about 80 megawatts. So it's big. So they're talking about big amounts of power. But a customer like a Rio Tinto or a Chevron, or maybe the airport, could not use this process. It would only be for a new customer coming into the state. The way that this is laid out is that the customer would have to show that they were creditworthy and try to enter into a contractual relationship to procure this power in 3 years or more from Rocky Mountain Power. Rocky Mountain Power because of some of the issues I mentioned before, they are not planning to bring on a lot of new power, particularly this decade. And there's a lot of customers who want power now. They want power soon. And so I think the legislature has seen this as a way to compete in that market, that potential market for data centers or other large new loads. But this bill is going to need a lot of work. It is a complicated one, one that, and I suspect that will change a fair amount before now in the end. But I do think it's worth everyone paying attention to, because it's going to take up a lot of attention. Tech companies, renewable energy companies, the utility, and also other customers. If you're bringing on a lot of new power, how do other customers bear those costs? And they shouldn't bear those costs. This bill sort of seeks, at least in its intention, to not have customers pay for any new resources that wouldn't serve them. But it still is a tricky deal. Our major concern at this time is, we've had some meetings with the sponsor, is the bill doesn't allow for renewables or energy storage to compete in this process. It excludes those resources. So it's only looking for kind of large thermal power, traditional gas or coal or maybe a nuclear plant. And that, in our view, is not only bad for the climate, it's bad policy for the state if we want to participate in this field. So we're trying to share with the sponsor that we need that part fixed. We need a level playing field. We need to have an open market. Customers are we know that particularly some of the large customers, if they're going to do this at all, they want to have solar and storage and wind be part, and geothermal be part of this mix. So that's a must change for us for this bill. And we're watching it closely. It was supposed to be in committee this afternoon, but it got pushed. And so, but one that we're going to keep a close eye on. And right now we're opposed until they make some changes to this bill, and we're going to keep it, but we're going to keep an eye on it. I suspect it will change. Okay, I'm going to go through this one a little more quickly than the last one, but it is also worth your attention. It's one to watch. It's one that we're still reviewing. It's HB 249, Nuclear Energy Amendments by Representative Carl Albrecht and Senator Ann Milner. Both of those legislators are close to leadership, and I suspect that this is a bill that both House and Senate leadership have had a lot of input on. It says nuclear energy amendments, and it does do. The legislature has expressed a lot of interest in nuclear energy, and I think that there's some exaggerated thinking about the timelines and the financial viability of new nuclear facilities. We're trying to share in all of our talking points that we shouldn't put all our eggs in the nuclear basket. We need to be using the solar, geothermal, well, solar and storage, and then potentially the geothermal resource that we have, which can come online a lot sooner. And if we're doing investments in new types of nuclear power plants, perhaps those will come on in the next decade, but it's a while out. It does establish a nuclear energy consortium among a number of energy stakeholders that would be chaired by the State Office of Energy Development and would have input from the governor's office, from legislative leadership. That's an important piece of this bill. It also makes some changes to the San Rafael Energy Center, which is a sort of research facility in Emery County, which is coal communities in Utah, to kind of have them establish a contractual relationship with Idaho National Lab. Those are all important pieces of this bill, but what we're really focusing in on is the fact that it would seek to create a new Utah Energy Council that would seek to make recommendations about state energy policy and planning and guide some new investments in the state. That is proposed to be a 5-member board that would be appointed, mixture of appointments with the governor's office, including the Office of Energy Development, and then one from the House and Senate leadership each. We obviously, so this is one that I would say that we could go either way. This could be really good. It's a good opportunity. It could also be one where if it's not balanced, we're having a council that isn't making the best decisions or the right balance for the state. So it's one that we are going to be in touch with the sponsor about and want to keep an eye on. It also, and I want to be honest that we're still reviewing this concept, that it creates another topic of energy investment zones that seek to demarcate places in the state that would be eligible for a certain type of basically kind of property tax differential incentive for new energy facilities. Thank goodness this bill is written to be resource neutral right now. So it's power plants, transmission lines, other energy related infrastructure. So I feel much better about that than I do about the previous bill, but it's still a big change and one that we're watching pretty closely. And we'll keep you up to date. Okay. This is a bill we oppose, and we're certainly planning to talk with the sponsor, Representative Colin Jack. Representative Jack is the new head of the House Public Utilities Energy and Technology Committee. He is an engineer who's worked for Dixie Power in St. George for a long time and has a number of energy bills. And two that we're concerned with, and but this one we wanted to flag because it's one we want you to help and take action on. The bill, HB 241, solar power plant amendments, would put some pretty blanket and onerous restrictions on new solar power facilities of over 1 megawatt. It would, in our reading, this would prevent solar from being installed on cropland, grazing land, and forest land. And then it would put create some new rules that would some fairly onerous setback, lot size, and noise restriction requirements on new solar facilities throughout the state. As far as our reading goes, it would apply to solar on private land, not just on public land. And so our concerns are as follows. One is obviously solar is a valuable resource. Utah is a sunny state. We are looking for new power facilities. It doesn't make any sense to be putting up barriers to put new solar on in different parts of the state. That's particularly true on private land, where we're impinging on property owners' rights to make some of those decisions about where they can put solar. It's a valuable resource. Let's not put things in way on it. I want to note that Utah Clean Energy is aware that and certainly understands that there are places where there should not be energy development. There should not be solar development. And we can have some of those conversations. It's something we will share with the chair. Like, let's have there are some provisions about siting and decommissioning. of those facilities that are things we could work through and try to work together, and we will work with our clean energy industry partners on. And if anyone's here who wants to provide commentary from, I'd love that in our Q&A. But at the time, right, this looks like a pretty not very well thought through, pretty blanket restriction on a really valuable resource. So we're going to share those concerns. I also just want to note that it's early in the session. This bill isn't yet heard. It will likely require a budget or have a fiscal impact, particularly because it tasks local officials with taking certain actions to enforce this law. And your input is going to be really valuable to help, I think, particularly to your state representative. So sharing your concerns, let's not put barriers in front of solar, is going to be really helpful, particularly if Representative Jack and House leadership hears about this bill from their own members. We want to flag that for them, and your voice can be really helpful here. Okay. I want to move on to and we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end. The next bill by Representative Jack is a lot wonkier, but it's really important for energy efficiency and then demand side management programs. It's HB 201 Energy Resource Amendments. This is maybe I don't know, Brandy, I keep misnumbering things, but the second or third wonkiest bill that we're dealing with this here. If you read it, don't read it. It seeks to change the resource planning process by which the Public Service Commission can evaluate Rocky Mountain Power's plans. And energy efficiency and peak demand reduction programs are an important part of how we meet our energy needs in a cost-effective way. Whatever disagreements we can have and discussions we have with the utility about some of its plans, it has had solid and important energy efficiency and peak demand programs that they do not meet all of our resource needs, but they are the cheapest energy resource. And particularly as we're seeking demand spiking, we should be limiting and promoting energy efficiency, demand management wherever we can. From our read of this bill, it would mean that the utility and the Public Service Commission would have to exclude peak demand resources and energy efficiency resources from their generation forecasts and some of their resource forecasts. I don't know how that would all play out, but it's good as part of our planning for the utility to share how it is using energy efficiency and demand response programs to meet our customers' needs. And then they also have a budget to invest in those resources. And so our concern is that it may handicap these very important programs, particularly at a time when we need them more than ever. And I'll just add that there are some other provisions around attributing costs to renewable energy resources and some other provisions that we're going to be in discussion with the chair about. But one that particularly that efficiency and demand response piece, we do not want to lose that as we're seeking to meet what the governor has laid out and what our state needs in a growing load environment. These are super important programs. And I will say on behalf of my colleague, Kevin Emerson, our building decarbonization manager and efficiency manager, that if you are working for a company who's worked in this space, or we'd like to learn a little bit more, we're not going to do a take action on this one today, but we'd like to be in touch. So please let me know, and I can, we can connect you with myself and with Kevin so we can talk about that. This is my blankets. This is my slide to talk about everything else, because it's only the end. It's only the middle of the third day. So there will likely be more bills and some more important bills to watch out for, both positive and negative. One of the positive things I'm watching out for is we do think there's going to be some helpful legislation to reduce emissions from medium and heavy duty vehicles, which are major contributors to local air quality. Particularly as the state is looking to have an inland port that would potentially promote more trucking. We need to be reducing those emissions. We have a good set of federal incentives, or we have had a good set of federal incentives to help reduce those. So be on the lookout. That's a positive bill that we expect to be out in the next week. The rest are kind of uncertainties. And the big one that we talked a lot about this summer and the legislature has put a lot of weight on is separating out Rocky Mountain Power and PacifiCorp. There's not enough time to go through this but it's been a back burner topic that the legislature certainly has made a lot of noise about having Utah separate from the larger Berkshire Hathaway PacifiCorp entity, our 6-state utility. That is a very costly, challenging endeavor, but one that we're expected to hear about, and it will likely color a lot of legislation that's in the works, even if there isn't a bill that specifically seeks to facilitate that. I heard yesterday in committee that a member of the legislative leadership who was very frustrated that the preliminary report that Rocky Mountain Power put out on this front was not sufficient. So this may become an issue this session, but it's likely one that will color a lot of debates in the background. We're watching carefully for changes to the authority or the Division of Air Quality and the Department of Environmental Quality. The legislature has certainly, I think, because of some of their I think often unjustified, but anger at federal rules, has sought to restrict or change how the Division of Air Quality and DEQ can operate. That's just, I don't know of a bill, but we want to make sure that we have a strong and competent state environmental and regulatory agency. We need that expertise here. We have good staff. And so we want to keep that. And that's another bit of noise that I'm hearing in the background. There will continue to be debates and discussion and legislation about the future of the Intermountain Power Project. There's a bill with a very wonky title, HB 70 Decommissioned Asset Amendments, that deals with some of the existing gas and coal plant at the facility we're keeping an eye on. And then finally, budget and appropriations are going on right now. We just want to make sure that the agencies are adequately funded and that we're doing things to incentivize cleaner vehicles, cleaner energy systems, energy efficiency in those, and I'll be watching those pretty carefully. So, and there'll surely be more, but I think that's a good overview for today. All right.
Okay, thank you so much, Josh. And thanks again to everybody for joining us today. We have some great questions in the chat, so I'm just going to dive right in, Josh.
Yeah.
And for those that have additional questions, please feel free to just start posting them in the chat. Okay, I'm going to start with, give me one quick second. Sorry about that. Okay, so this is going back to House Bill 241. This is the solar and renewable energy on grazing lands. So Glenn had a good question. He's wondering if that would apply to desert land in regards to the grazing portion. You know, how would federal land like BLM be impacted?
Glenn, in terms of authority over federal land, this is not something that I have spent a ton of time on. I assume that I need to look into this because I don't really know. And in terms of, usually state laws don't supersede federal laws with respect, and Utah has a ton of federal land. And there's been some recent solar planning, but I don't know, and it's a good question for us to dig into.
More to follow. Okay. On the same bill, Michael hit it on the head with asking if would constituents or landowners in these areas, wouldn't they see this as government overreach, restricting what private landowners can or can't do on their acreage?
100%. And I think that we are certainly think that there's we're reaching out to a lot of folks, libertarian groups, you know, private property and folks, but I think the more that that's shared, the better off. We should allow, you know, we want to make sure that we're allowing people, you know, and certainly lease payments, solar development has often been profitable and helpful to not only to counties, but to private landowners. And we shouldn't be putting barriers in front of that, particularly if we don't have to.
Yeah. Okay. Brad had an interesting question. This is switching gears. that, just wondering if there was anything focused on reducing Scope 1 emissions for buildings.
There are no bills in the works that I know of that would seek to focus on directly on reducing emissions from buildings there. And so we are certainly concerned about how the legislature, I mean, that particular bill, HB 201, because of its impact on, general efficiency and peak demand programs. But there's not currently any bills that seek to reduce emissions in that space.
And as you noted, day 3 of a 45 session, there's plenty of room for surprises. I love this question from Jim. He's wondering, why do you think that renewables and energy efficiency are so political, even though so cost effective?
Well, yeah, this is a really good question, and one that we are, and I think for all of us, and I appreciate everyone's being here and you're listening, is like, we need to share these stories. We need to get information out there that this is the cheapest, most cost-effective resource. It's also one that is deployable right now. And we need to be letting our public officials know we need to have a portfolio of resources that meet our needs, not just say, well, this resource, whether it's a coal plant, nuclear plant, or gas plant, can do it all for us. We need all these resources. We know that not only is Weber Sunny State, not only is it a homegrown resource, but it's a zero fuel cost resource. You want to have those in your portfolio to help balance costs. And I'll note that the utilities, the Rocky Mountain Power's recent filing noted that low-cost, zero-emissions resources played an important role in helping to limit cost to customers from spiking international local coal and gas prices in their last rate case. And so we've seen this. My feeling is that we just need to get it out there and do another round of education and just point to the projects that are coming on. We have some really large projects coming to our state, and I think my hope certainly is that state reps, local government officials will see those and share those stories. But you saw from and ultimately, I hope that we don't need to learn some harder lessons about the fact that we're going to get out competed in this space if we're not participating. The United States needs to continue to be working here. Utah needs to continue to work there. We're going to lose out on some of the most valuable power and energy markets in the next decade. I hope that's helpful. Keep beating the drum.
I know we want to save time to talk about some next steps, Josh, and take action. So why don't we take a break? If there are additional questions, please keep posting in the chat and we'll double check before we close today. But why don't we switch now? I think we got through a bulk of them.
Yeah.
And then let's talk about what people can do today.
Okay, well, just first, we wanted to make sure everyone knows how to stay engaged throughout this session, and both with us and then with the legislature. Brandy, our link to our website and our homepage will have our legislative bill tracker. That it is up, and I keep that up to date as quickly as I can. And so as new bills come out, we share the title, the description, our position on the bill, and then if it's in hearing or if it's going to go to the House floor, how it moves through the process. So we'll try to update those in real time. The session gets busy, and so if I know there's some amazing watchdogs, folks doing a ton of time in this. Please prompt me. Let me know I need to update a bill, or if you have questions, let our team know so we can. But that's a great way to stay engaged with what we know about in the energy landscape. The legislative website, for what it's worth, is a really helpful tool, and it's pretty good about keeping up to date on bills, on debates that have happened in committee, and then when committee hearings are going to happen. And so that's le.utah.gov, and you can keep up on all of the key committees that we look at. We're most focused on the House Public Utilities, Energy and Technology Committee, the Senate Natural Resources, Environment and Agriculture Committee, and the Senate Transportation, Energy and Public Utilities Committee are the ones that we track closely. And everyone here, if you want to, you can participate in person or virtual in a hearing. It is really helpful for people to hear comments from their constituents. They care about that. They care about that people are paying attention. We try to be purposeful and selective in asking you to spend your time. But even if you just want to listen in, there's a virtual option for you to hear what's going on bills. And I would encourage you to do so as you can, and to know your state rep, and your state senator is another, really important, because they are your representative. They need to hear from you. They want to hear from you, and they will listen to you in a way that someone from another area of the state might not. Okay. Actions that we need for today. So we want your help, and to keep, particularly, there'll probably be some bills this session. There'll probably be some more bills. But I want to just urge everyone, we are going to work to send out a take action as part of our shortly about and ask you to call or text to let your state representative, particularly your House member, know your concerns about HB 241 solar power plant amendments by Representative Jack. This is, again, that's the bill that would put barriers in front of solar development. We do not, and I think a simple message that, hey, we want to make sure we're taking advantage of this resource, not put barriers without consideration for how it might work and how it might impact private property rights, and have that get to them right now, I think is going to be super helpful as this bill starts to before it gets heard in committee. Particularly since it's likely going to be in the committee that Representative Jack would be the head of. It's going to be helpful for you to weigh in now. I want to say a quick call, text, or personalized email with the bill HB 241 solar power plant amendments in the title would be super helpful. You do not need to be an expert on this bill to make those comments. But your voice is going to be super helpful here to get in front of them now at this moment when they're just starting to look through some bills. And we will provide some very simple talking points. But again, don't overthink this. This is a bill that creates new barriers to solar. It's not where we need to be going. So a simple message from you would be awesome. The other item that isn't an ask for today, but it's an ask soon, is we want your support in asking the U.S. Congress and our congressional delegation to preserve key tax credits for clean energy and energy efficiency and some of the existing grant programs. We have a new Congress that is Republican controlled, although fairly narrowly, particularly in the House and in the Senate. And then with the Trump administration coming into office, there's been some concerning executive orders about clean energy, including disbursements of funds. And then the Congress is looking to debate a number of issues related to taxes and budget this quarter pretty soon. And so they may look to repeal or scale back some of the tax credits for renewable energy at the utility level, at the residential level, and energy efficiency and electric vehicles. And your voice to let folks know this isn't just some out-of-state thing that benefits others. These are programs that benefit Utah communities, Utah companies. They help our economy. They help our air quality. And I think that because so many of this has come into Republican states, conservative states, red states, including Utah, that Utah's congressional delegation has a chance to, have a really important voice here. And so we want, that's away from the legislative session, but one thing, we're polite, positive messages, but telling folks to preserve some of the existing tax credits is going to be really helpful. I want to just let you know that my colleagues, Max Becker, can help with that. His email is on this slide. But he and I and Brandy will coordinate on getting some messages on this front pretty shortly. And as we don't know where things are moving on this front quite yet, but it's one that we expect to move pretty fast this quarter and would love your help on. With that, those are my prepared remarks. Brandy, do we have any more questions?
Yep, if time allows, we're going to take we do have one more question.
Okay.
First, I'll just take care of just a little bit of housekeeping. I just put in the link for those of you that are not already signed up. Josh does send a weekly roundup during the session, and you can sign up to receive that in the link by our newsletter. That's in the chat, so look out for that. We will be following up with a recording of today's webinar, and that will also include information about the action items that Josh has just mentioned. So with that, I would love to get this final question in, Josh, and then we'll release everybody. Mark was asking if you touched on this earlier, but if you could tell a little bit more about the governor's proposed plan to increase energy production in Utah, that's Operation Gigawatt, and how that's likely to be taken up in the legislature, its impact on renewables.
Yeah. So there are some things that we like and I think are helpful, very helpful about Operation Gigawatt. One is that it suggests that we should be investing in and updating and working together on our transmission system and developing new energy resources. I think their team has started to do outreach to a number of stakeholders, and I would say we're one of them, to help think through their planning and their plans. There isn't a lot of detail yet on exactly how they're planning to approach this. I suspect that they will weigh in on a number of these bills and seek to be partners in some of the legislative session. I think the governor and his team are doing a solid job. But they have an important role to play in this. I want to hear more from them as we move along. So there isn't a ton of like legislation or policymaking on this front yet. There is a website that is maintained, and what they've pointed to are expanding transmission capacity and then trying to develop both geothermal and nuclear resources. The governor has asked for $20 million for related to nuclear energy and $4 million related to developing enhanced geothermal energy, like we're seeing come online. Pretty exciting in Utah here with in the Millard County, that portion, southwestern portion of the state. What exactly, if those will be funded or at what levels, I don't know yet. But that's kind of the detail of we have yet on Operation Gigawatt. There is a new Director of Energy Development, Emmy Lasovsky. And so I expect that she just started at the end of the year. But I expect we'll get to hear from her more about her visions and her plans on the year ahead. She sat down with a broad group of stakeholders, which we're encouraged by. So I just wanted to throw that in. I know that's I think we have to see exactly where we're going to see in terms of policy or budget, where the governor's really going to put his thumb on the scale. And so this is still some things to be learned. So it's a good start, but one where they're going to have to flesh out a little more about exactly what their plans are in other areas to really understand it in full.
Got it. Great.
We want to be at the table. So that's going to be important.
We want to be at the table.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Josh. That was a great roundup of everything to come. I think that wraps it up for today's virtual Lunch and Learn. Oh, I'm sorry, Josh. We have one more question.
Yeah.
We'll want to hang back. Are there any plans to further develop hydrogen resources?
So this is a good question. To my knowledge, there's not any, the big facility that it's hydrogen is at the Intermountain Power Plant site, the Intermountain Power Agency site. They have a plan for some hydrogen through electrolysis to use as a sort of storage resource that would serve IPP, but really that means the counties in Los Angeles area that have taken that power. It's been a long time coming, but a fairly exciting development, one that but other than that site, I have not heard a ton about hydrogen as a resource. That doesn't mean that there won't be some, but that's the kind of what I've heard as a major emphasis thus far. And so I suspect we'll hear some things outside of the state, but I don't know within Utah what's or really in the Mountain West states what's gonna happen in the hydrogen fund right now.
Got it.
Good question.
Are there any other questions before we wrap up? Okay. Well, from all of us at Utah Clean Energy, thank you again for joining us for our first virtual lunch and learn of 2025. Certainly more to come and a lot more information to come in the next 45 days through the Utah legislative session. I'm going to go ahead and close the meeting and thank you again for joining us. And thank you, Josh.
Thanks, everyone.